My beloved child, do not scroll away from this moment. Something has been waiting quietly for you, and the reason you are hearing these words now is connected to a truth that has only recently begun to rise to the surface. There was a moment when the person tied so deeply to your heart saw something they had refused to see before, and when that realization finally reached them, they could no longer hold themselves together in the same way. They had believed one version of you for far too long. They had allowed assumptions, distance, silence, other people's opinions, and even their own fear to create a picture that was never complete. But something happened. Something small on the outside, yet enormous within them, broke through the story they had been telling themselves. And when it did, they became emotional in a way they never expected. They realized they may have been wrong about you. Stay here, because what happened inside them was not a simple change of mind. It was deeper than that. It was the kind of realization that makes a person revisit old conversations, old choices, old moments of silence, and suddenly see them with different eyes. They began remembering things you said that they once misunderstood. They thought about the times you remained quiet when you could have defended yourself. They remembered the way you stepped back instead of creating chaos. They remembered your patience, your restraint, and the moments when you showed care without demanding anything in return. For a long time, they interpreted some of those things as distance. They thought your silence meant you did not care enough. They thought your boundaries meant rejection. They thought the moments when you protected your own heart were proof that you were unwilling to let them in. But now another possibility has entered their mind, and it is shaking everything they thought they knew. What they are beginning to understand is that some of your silence was not coldness. It was exhaustion. Some of your distance was not punishment. It was protection. Some of the moments when you did not explain yourself were not because you had nothing to say, but because you had already reached the point where constantly proving your intentions was becoming too painful. And this truth has been following them. It followed them into quiet moments. It followed them when the noise around them disappeared. It followed them when they tried to distract themselves. They wanted to push the thought away, but it returned stronger each time. What if I judged them unfairly? What if I misunderstood the very person who was trying to love me in the only way they knew how? That question opened a door they were not prepared to walk through. Once it appeared, they could not close it again. They began tracing the path backward, remembering where their doubts started. And my child, not all of those doubts belonged to them. Some were planted by fear. Some came from past experiences that had nothing to do with you. Some came from voices around them that spoke with confidence but without understanding. Someone may have told them to be careful with you. Someone may have questioned your intentions. Someone may have interpreted your actions through their own wounds and then handed that interpretation to your soulmate as if it were truth. At the time, your person may have listened because it matched what they were already afraid of believing. But now, those same words no longer feel certain. Now they are asking themselves why they accepted conclusions without truly looking at your heart. There is one memory in particular that has begun returning to them more often. It was a moment you probably thought meant very little. Perhaps it was a conversation where you could have exposed everything you were feeling, yet chose kindness instead. Perhaps it was the moment you walked away without trying to damage their reputation. Perhaps you wished them well when a part of you was hurting. Maybe you gave them space even though every part of you wanted clarity. At the time, they did not understand the strength it took for you to do that. They thought it meant you could simply move on without feeling anything. But recently, something made them realize how wrong that assumption may have been. They suddenly saw that restraint is not the absence of emotion. Sometimes restraint is what happens when emotion is so deep that a person refuses to turn it into destruction. And that is where the tears began. Not in front of everyone. Not in some dramatic scene where people gathered around them asking what was wrong. No, this happened in a quieter place, where there was no one to impress and nowhere to hide from their own thoughts. They may have been sitting alone, staring at something that reminded them of you. They may have heard a song, seen an old message, remembered your face, or watched someone speak about loyalty, misunderstanding, or regret. Something touched the place they had kept guarded. Their defenses weakened. Suddenly, they were no longer thinking about whether they were right. They were thinking about whether they had hurt someone who had actually been sincere with them. There is a difference, my child, between missing a person and realizing you may have misjudged them. Missing someone creates longing. But realizing you were wrong creates a deeper ache because it brings responsibility with it. It forces a person to confront the possibility that some of the pain they blamed on circumstances may have been made worse by their own choices. Your soulmate is beginning to face that possibility now. They are thinking about times they could have asked you what you meant instead of assuming. They are thinking about times they could have trusted your actions instead of listening to fear. They are thinking about the moments when they pulled away and then quietly expected you to understand why. And the more they remember, the harder it becomes for them to maintain the old version of the story. But there is something even more important happening beneath all of this. They are beginning to see your strength differently. Before, they may have mistaken your ability to continue living your life as proof that you were unaffected. Now they are starting to realize that strength can exist beside heartbreak. A person can keep moving while still carrying unanswered questions. A person can smile while rebuilding parts of themselves nobody knows were damaged. A person can wish someone well while privately grieving what could have been. Your soulmate is slowly understanding that you may have carried much more than they ever recognized, and this realization is creating an emotion they did not expect, respect mixed with regret. That combination is powerful because it changes the way they see you. They are no longer only remembering what happened between you. They are beginning to notice who you became because of it. They are seeing that you did not allow confusion to completely destroy your softness. You did not allow disappointment to turn you into the worst thing that happened to you. You may have grown quieter. You may have become more careful. You may have learned to protect your energy. But somewhere inside you, there remained a part of your heart that still believed love should be honest, mutual, and safe. And strangely, the more they see this, the more difficult it becomes for them to defend the assumptions they once made. They are also remembering something they did not expect to remember, the way you looked at them before everything became complicated. There was a softness there. A kind of recognition. Maybe you never said everything you felt, but there were moments when your eyes revealed more than your words. Your soulmate remembers that now. They are comparing that version of you to the version they convinced themselves existed later, and the two no longer match. They are wondering whether they turned your caution into rejection, your uncertainty into dishonesty, and your need for reassurance into something it was never meant to be. This is why they cried, "My child." Not only because they miss you. Not only because memories returned. They cried because something inside them finally admitted, "I may have misunderstood them." And once those words formed, even silently, they could not be taken back. Yet this is not where the revelation ends. There is something they discovered about you that intensified everything. They learned, directly or indirectly, that during a time when they thought you were unaffected, you were actually carrying a private struggle of your own. Maybe someone mentioned something you went through. Maybe they noticed a detail they had overlooked before. Maybe they finally understood why your energy changed during a certain period. What they discovered made them rethink one of the harshest assumptions they ever held about you. They had once wondered why you did not fight harder for the connection in a particular moment. Now they are beginning to understand that you may have been fighting battles they knew nothing about. You were trying to hold yourself together. You were learning how to survive disappointment, uncertainty, responsibilities, and emotions that were difficult to explain. They had only seen what you did not give them. They had not seen what life was demanding from you at the same time. And when this realization reached them, it humbled them. They began asking questions they should have asked long ago. Was I expecting too much while giving too little reassurance? Did I make them feel they had to earn what should have been given freely? Did I punish them emotionally for fears created by someone else? Did I expect them to read my mind while refusing to tell them what was really happening inside me? These questions are uncomfortable, and that is why your soulmate avoided them before. It was easier to believe you were the confusing one. Easier to say you were difficult to understand. Easier to tell themselves that your distance proved their suspicions. But growth often begins when the easiest explanation stops feeling true. And that is exactly what is happening now. The story they once used to protect themselves is no longer protecting them. It is confronting them. There was another moment recently when they almost reached out. Their hand may have moved toward their phone. Your name may have crossed their mind so strongly that for a few seconds they imagined what they would say if you answered. But they stopped. Not because they did not care. They stopped because they suddenly realized that reaching out would require honesty. Not casual conversation. Not vague words. Not pretending the past never happened. If they speak to you now, a part of them knows they would eventually have to admit that their understanding of you has changed. And that frightens them more than they expected. It is easy to miss someone in private. It is much harder to approach that person and say, "I see things differently now." It is easy to feel regret alone. It is much harder to risk hearing how deeply your choices affected someone you cared about. Your soulmate is standing near that emotional threshold. They are trying to gather courage, but they are also asking themselves whether they have waited too long. That question has become one of their deepest fears. They wonder whether your heart still responds to them the way it once did. They wonder whether someone else has noticed the qualities they failed to value. They wonder whether you have already made peace with a future that no longer includes them. And strangely, this fear is teaching them something important. For the first time, they are understanding what uncertainty may have felt like for you. They are experiencing the same waiting, the same unanswered questions, the same fear of caring more than the other person. But heaven is not showing you this so you will feel superior to them. It is not about revenge. It is not about watching someone suffer because they failed to understand you. The deeper lesson is about truth. Sometimes people do not recognize the value of a person until they are forced to confront their own distorted perspective. Sometimes love exposes not only affection but insecurity, fear, pride, and old wounds. The connection becomes a mirror, and what a person sees in that mirror can either make them run or make them grow. Your soulmate ran from part of that reflection before. Now they are turning back toward it. And what they are seeing has surprised them. They are seeing that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for consistency. You were not demanding that they never make mistakes. You were asking them to communicate instead of disappearing into assumptions. You were not asking them to abandon themselves for you. You wanted a connection where both hearts could exist without one person constantly questioning whether the other would stay. They understand that more clearly now because something has changed in their own life. Perhaps they recently experienced disappointment from someone they trusted. Perhaps another person misunderstood them in a way that felt unfair. Perhaps they tried explaining themselves and realized how painful it is when someone has already decided what your intentions are before hearing you. That experience made them think of you. And suddenly, the universe became a mirror. They felt what it is like to be judged by a conclusion instead of understood through a conversation. They felt the frustration of knowing your heart while watching another person interpret it incorrectly. And in that moment, your soulmate remembered you. They remembered how many times you may have been trying to tell them, in words or actions, "Please see me for who I am, not for what fear is telling you I might be." That realization went deep. They began to understand that love cannot survive when one person is constantly on trial. Love cannot grow when every silence becomes evidence, every boundary becomes rejection, and every mistake becomes confirmation of an old fear. They finally see that perhaps they were not simply protecting themselves. Maybe sometimes they were protecting themselves so intensely that they unintentionally pushed away the very connection they were afraid of losing. And this is the part they have not told anyone. They are embarrassed by some of what they now understand. Not because they believe they are a terrible person, but because awareness has shown them the distance between who they wanted to be and how they sometimes behaved. They wanted to be someone who could recognize genuine love. They wanted to believe they were emotionally wise enough to know when someone cared. Yet now they wonder if fear spoke louder than intuition. There are nights when this question keeps them awake longer than they admit. They replay details. A sentence you said. A message they left unanswered. A moment when you tried to explain something but they had already emotionally withdrawn. A time when you needed reassurance and they convinced themselves you were asking for too much. Now those scenes feel different. The words have not changed. The memories have not changed. But the person viewing them has changed, and that changes everything. They are starting to notice all the places where your intentions were visible but their fear refused to translate them correctly. They remember how you cared about details. How you noticed when something was wrong even when they claimed they were fine. How you gave them opportunities to speak when they were not ready. How you sometimes stayed longer in conversations than your own peace could afford because you were trying to understand them. They used to think you would always be there. They did not realize those quiet efforts had a limit. Now they do. And that is another reason the tears came. Because there is a strange grief that appears when a person finally understands something after the moment has passed. It is the grief of wishing you could return to an earlier version of yourself and whisper, "Pay attention." Do not let fear ruin what you will later recognize as rare. Your soulmate has had that thought. If I could go back, I would handle that moment differently. But they cannot go back. They know that. So their heart is beginning to ask a different question: is there still something I can do now? That question is where the story begins to turn. Until recently, their regret was mostly internal. It existed as memory, emotion, and private realization. But now regret is slowly becoming intention. They no longer only want to understand what happened. A part of them wants to correct something. Not erase the past, because they know that is impossible. But they want the truth between you to be clearer than it was before. They want you to know they finally see something. Yet they do not know how to say it. They imagine starting with an apology, but then they fear it will sound too small. They imagine explaining themselves, but they worry explanation may sound like an excuse. They imagine simply saying they miss you, but they know those words would not touch the deeper issue. What they truly want to say is more difficult. I did not understand you when I should have. I allowed fear to interpret your heart for me. And now I see things I wish I had seen sooner. Those words have formed inside them even if they have not yet been spoken. And there is something else. They are beginning to suspect that you knew they misunderstood you all along. That possibility unsettles them. They are remembering moments when your expression changed after something they said. Times when you became quieter instead of arguing. Times when you looked tired, not angry. At the time, they assumed you were withdrawing. Now they wonder if you simply realized there was no point trying to convince someone who had already decided what to believe. That thought hurts them. Because it means there may have been moments when you stood right in front of them feeling unseen while they believed they understood everything. My child, being misunderstood by someone you deeply care for creates a particular kind of loneliness. It makes you question whether love is enough when perception is distorted. And perhaps part of your journey has been learning that you cannot force another person to see what they are not emotionally prepared to recognize. You can offer honesty. You can communicate. You can show consistency. But eventually, they must choose whether they will look through fear or through truth. Your soulmate is beginning to choose truth. But truth is demanding something from them now. It is demanding humility. It is asking them to release the need to be right. It is asking them to accept that some of the conclusions they defended may have caused unnecessary distance. It is asking them to look at your heart without filtering it through old experiences. And most importantly, it is asking them to decide whether they will remain silent now that they understand more. This is why their emotions have become stronger lately. The realization itself was only the beginning. Now comes the decision. Do they keep this truth hidden and continue wondering what might have happened if they had been brave enough to speak? Or do they risk vulnerability and tell you what they finally understand? They have not decided completely yet. But something happened very recently that moved them closer. They heard something about you. Not gossip. Not something meant to turn them against you. The opposite. It was a detail about how you handled a situation when they were not present. Something you did when there was no reason to impress them. Something that revealed your character when you had nothing to gain. And that detail changed the atmosphere inside them. It confirmed what their heart had been trying to admit: the version of you they feared may never have been the real you at all. They became quiet after hearing it. The person speaking may not even have realized how deeply those words affected them. Your soulmate tried to act normal, but internally, everything shifted. They began connecting details like pieces of a puzzle. Your patience. Your restraint. Your loyalty. Your silence. Your boundaries. Your decision not to retaliate. Suddenly, all of it formed a picture they had not been willing to see before. And in that picture, you were not the person who failed them. You were someone trying to love while protecting a heart that had already endured enough uncertainty. That realization broke something open. They stepped away emotionally, perhaps physically too, because they needed privacy. And this is when they finally allowed themselves to cry without explaining it away. They were not crying because they had lost control of their life. They were crying because clarity had arrived too late to feel comfortable. But my child, there is one final layer to this revelation, and it is the part that may change what happens next. While they were crying, while they were replaying everything, one specific memory returned more clearly than all the others. It was a moment involving you that they had almost forgotten. At the time, they thought your words meant one thing. Now they understand those words may have meant something completely different. And when they realized what you were actually trying to tell them in that moment, they whispered something to themselves they never expected to say. They said, "I think they were telling me the truth the whole time." But that was not the sentence that frightened them most. A few moments later, another thought entered their mind, one they could no longer push away. Because if you had been telling the truth all along, then there was someone else whose words they had trusted instead. And your soulmate suddenly realized they needed to find out why that person had worked so hard to make them doubt you.